So, very good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are, and welcome to Unlocked Cloud Scale Analytics. For the next couple of hours, we would like to take you through how you can unlock cloud scale analytics. We have demos, we have insights to patterns, templates, how you can architect your solution. But without further ado, let me please introduce Didem Un Ates with our keynote on what keeps chief data officers awake at night.
Hi everyone, I'm Didem Un Ates. I head Applied Strategy for Data AI in our Chief Data Office as part of our sales organization, which is called Microsoft Customer and Partner Solutions. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today. We have a fantastic agenda. Basically, I would love to talk a little bit about our engagements with hundreds of Chief Data Officers around the world, as well as some of the latest market research around data. What we are finding as the biggest opportunities and challenges, and why we are here to collaborate with you for all these opportunities and challenges. Maybe before that, a little bit about myself. I am delighted to be in this space, and I absolutely love working with our teams at Microsoft and our customers and partners, not just in data AI, but also in diversity and inclusion, in education and responsible AI. So if you would like to collaborate in those areas as well, please feel free to reach out. Now, why we are here today? My journey started in data AI about 10 years ago, primarily with startups. As part of Microsoft Ventures and Accelerators team, we built AI solutions by industry, by geography. And that was a fascinating experience, which led me to join Microsoft Research when we, as Microsoft, formed our very first business AI team. So our charter in that team was to incubate AI solutions for enterprises, like AI for sales, AI for customer service or marketing. And as some of these algorithms became quite successful, my team and we moved over to our engineering team to launch these solutions as official Microsoft products. And I'm proud to say, maybe you're familiar with Empower Virtual Agent or Customer Insights are some of these solutions that we built and are now being used by billions of people, billions of partners around the world. That's when Accenture reached out to ask me to set up their Microsoft Data AI practice. So I did that for a while, which was fascinating. And I rejoined Microsoft to accelerate our data AI business in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. That's when actually at Accenture, I had started to engage with these chief data officers from our clients around the world. Because it was the midst of the pandemic where everybody across all industries wanted to accelerate their digital transformation. And of course, data was at the core of that effort. And when I moved over to Microsoft again, I don't know why, coincidentally or basically practically, we started doing these pilots with chief data officer roundtables to listen, first of all, to these amazing leaders, very powerful leaders unleashing the power of data in their organization and try to help them in the best way we could. So we first piloted about 12 roundtables around the world, most of them in EMEA. And then I'm pleased to say we formalized that program even more, where we have now CDOs councils by geography, by industry, and so on. And we want to expand this program, these efforts even more. So some of these insights that I'll share with you today are very much the distillation of these discussions, as well as the market research around hundreds of CDOs as we build our partnership in this space. So let me share a very brief video about these very first pilots, because they really established our thinking and approach to data with these leaders. We, first of all, wanted to experiment these discussions by industry, by geography. Some of our teams focused on a single country like Poland, like Switzerland, and have these very comfortable productive discussions. Others wanted to focus on a single industry, like retail, where, of course, analytics plays such a huge role. And the themes around data, what we wanted to have in these discussions, always came from these chief data officers or our customer account teams on the ground, because that is the reality, obviously, for that geography, for that specific. So UK, for example, discussed enterprise-wide data platforms, whereas Middle East Africa wanted to explore how we build data-led customer insights. Mind you, this has been in the midst, at the peak of the pandemic, where customer insights, of course, is hugely important. Germany focused on data-driven business. Western Europe focused on retail industry from a data transformation and modeling perspective. And I recall France focusing on the cultural elements. How do we reinvent an organization with data? So these one-to-one, one-to-many discussions were incredibly helpful as we built this program and built our own strategy in terms of how we can help chief data officers around the world. So we see them, obviously we see them as strategic visionaries who unlock the power of data. That's what is critical. What we have heard, I think you would agree, and my colleagues, my team members will expand on each of these concepts later in the conference, are very common challenges and opportunities, I would like to say. So how do we reduce the cost of data engineering? How do we use data for business decisions? How do we unify our ecosystem so we remove data silos? How do we collaborate with all the lines of business and horizontals in our organizations? And of course, how do we set up data governance and manage data so that we minimize compliance risks and manage data productively? So obviously, we want to have this data platform for actionable insights for our businesses, the data governance, the ability to increase the top line and bottom line impact of data, and of course spend less time preparing data, cleaning data, and improving our operational efficiencies. And if we kind of group these opportunities, I don't want to call them challenges, there are 5 buckets in our view. Number 1 is data quality. These numbers come from research, very recent research from last year, 2021, done with more than 300 chief data officers. Basically, 82% of them told us that data quality is number 1 barrier to their successful data integration or migration efforts. Furthermore, they told us that their teams spend 40% of their time on data quality, which is in cleaning data, basically, which is, to me, mind-blowing. We talk about these concepts, but if we actually quantify the business impact, if we could reduce that 40% to 20%, imagine what kind of an impact we would have in our businesses. And similarly, data culture, data literacy is so important. This is about change management and change leadership. Only 35% of these CDOs believed that they would trust data-driven insights when the insights were in contradiction or in conflict with their intuition, which is, again, very shocking in my humble opinion. And 88% told us that they are struggling with finding the right talent or the right skills to be able to implement their data projects successfully. Analytics, of course, is key, absolutely key to unlocking that value of data and infusing AI as the next step, right? And even in retail industry, these challenges differed by geography and industry as well, we found. So retail is one of the most advanced industries in terms of analytics. Even there, 50% of the CDOs said they had only mixed results with their efforts. So, and fourthly, fifthly, we have data governance, data management capabilities, as big opportunities, and of course, privacy and compliance. So all of these things, we feel if we can tackle them, we could get our sleep back. And in all my discussions, I encourage us, our teams, to first listen to our customers and partners. How is their journey? What are their priorities? What are the big rocks they want to focus on? And what are their challenges, of course? So we do that, not just for data, but also how do you become an AI platform, or how do you improve analytics? So as the next step, we also offer our learnings as Microsoft. Obviously, we have our own data journey, right, with our incredibly diverse portfolio of products and geographies and markets. So we offer our journey, our learnings, our pain points. And here we go on data. The very first milestone for us was forming a diverse and inclusive multidisciplinary cross-business team. This is so important to make sure we get all the perspectives and the opportunities on the table equally at the same time. The second step was data modernization, of course. Why? So that we could enable a consolidated balcony view of our data lake. And the third is a unified data governance approach. Why? Again, to discover, to classify the data across our multiple estates, and to be able to apply data governance policies automatically. This is very important from multiple angles. And lastly, I'd like to emphasize we want to scale data management with data standards and compliance programs, so we don't have to go around circles or redo the work again. So how do we have our sleep back? Number one, we would strongly recommend conducting a data maturity assessment and a discussion, and an open, collaborative, inclusive discussion around data strategy. What do we want to get out of this? Number two, how do we combine these centralized and federated data estates, data domains? How do we partner with our stakeholders, the lines of business leaders and other key stakeholders in the data discussions? And how do we set up our data management practices? If I may maybe expand on that a little bit, how do we enable a unified data mapping, management and governance processes? How do we automate data discovery, which is absolutely, about reducing that 40% cleaning piece, for example? How do we enable sensitive data cataloging, or how do we have an end-to-end view of our enterprise data estate? And finally, how do we minimize and manage compliance risks, and so on? And lastly, of course, it's all about the collaboration. How do we make sure we have a council with clear accountability, clear actions, and priorities? So this was just a teaser conversation. Please enjoy the conference, and we look forward to hearing from you, your feedback, your questions, challenges, opportunities, anything we can help with. We do believe we are privileged to be in this space, but with great power, obviously, comes great responsibility. And look forward to hearing from you. As I mentioned, I have also expanded on these thoughts in a blog in the Forbes magazine. You're most welcome to read that and give your feedback as well. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Didem and our keynote there on what keeps chief data officers awake at night. I'd now like us to move on to what makes a scalable data management analytics platform or infrastructure. So over the past 2 years, Microsoft have been working very closely with small, large, mediums, and large enterprises on really defining and understanding the different pain points that enterprises have today. And through a course of kind of research, piloting, working with those particular customers, we've been able to come up with what a scalable data management analytics system should look like. Throughout our research and our working with different customers, we wanted to understand the challenges that a lot of the technical teams have today and really enabling the business to derive data from their organization's data. Some of the key things that really we'd like to kind of call out are complexity. So working with complex data architectures that don't scale. scale. That thing whereby you start off with a data architecture, 3 years down the line, you have to come back and you have to reiterate, and there you cannot bolt components on, you cannot scale. Also complex architectures really change staffing needs. Whereas 10 years ago, you maybe only needed a software engineering team. Today in the cloud, you need a bunch of new teams, including a DevOps team, a product team, a data team, infrastructure, etc. Also, there's uncertainty. So as you look at technical innovation and it continues to advance, you need to continue to involve your platform. Whatever you do in the cloud adoption framework, it's often difficult to determine the best steps for scaling and optimizing your environment. There's nothing prescribed, or there wasn't anything prescribed that you could actually go to. Skilling. So when we talked to a number of customers, we found that customers are still using their on-premise knowledge, and the skill sets that they use today, unfortunately, don't translate to the cloud. Only a small majority. And there's significant differences in how we operate on-prem, where you have full control versus kind of the cloud-based services. Also, you can think of on-prem that you have effectively a data center, you have racks, and you can buy one of a type, whereas in cloud, you can have multiple of that type without having to worry about the amount of rack space you've got. So we need to do something on filling that skilling gap to adapt to better ways and newer ways of working in the cloud. And then equally, when we look at kind of data architectures and data analytics projects, these are projects that typically take a long time. And there was a lot of impression that it can take several months to deploy a new solution and even longer to prove its value. And that lack of real-time trusted data to make decisions can also slow down the process even more. So with that in mind, the team got together and we functioned to really try to come through and develop and optimize a data strategy. And what we have come up with today is something called the Azure Cloud Scale Analytics Scenario. It is a scalable, repeatable framework for building a modern data platform to meet your unique business needs. Now, we could say, okay, we started from scratch, but quite honestly, that is not the best way to start off. What we did, we drew from the best of our existing assets with extensive experience from our field teams, our partners, from you, our customers, and real world engagements to provide kind of this prescriptive guidance, resources, because we just don't want it to be a document, and you'll hear more about that from Marvin and Hamood later on in the session, through to best practices to align your people, processes, and technology to develop and implement. We based it upon top of the cloud adoption framework. So not only do we build upon top of all the best practices, but we actually take our Microsoft's cloud adoption framework and build upon top so that we've got strategy, plan, ready, adopt, govern, manage, secure, and organize phases for your modern data platform. We want reference architectures. We appreciate that there's going to be maybe a 70-30 split. So 70% is prescribed, 30% is how you interpret it or how your business works. And the scenario is designed to be modular. The reference architectures will allow you to start with a small footprint and grow over time whilst adapting the scenario to your use cases. We want you to also be able to take code that allows you to deploy this. And Marvin and Hamood will be introducing our deployment templates, which allow repeatable templates, which are accelerators to the 5 core infrastructure and resource deployments. And then finally, if we look over the top of this, there's a couple of other things we need to consider is assessments. So we need to understand the business strategy. Do you have a business strategy? Do you understand where you are going? And inside those kind of assessments, what skilling do you have? What is the skilling gaps that you need to build up? And equally, you're probably not going to want to deploy the biggest, largest SKU size or deployment size of XYZ service. You want to be able to always optimize your data analytics workloads with 5 key optimize principles, which we're going to kind of go into a little bit further on. But that's what we would call a well-architected framework. Then next thing down, we also have looked consistently at our customers and gone, where is the challenge that we see on increasing and accelerating our time to value? If we look today, a crucial component of your data strategy and platform implementation is federating data ownership across your organization. So unlike traditional centralized data ownership, IT owns all of the, under the traditional centralized data ownership, IT owns all of the data and services. You get complex kind of centralized architecture, which really impedes some of that agility. The line of businesses typically rely on the IT to meet their data analytics leads. And then on top of that, the lines of business sometimes go outside of central IT, as we saw in countless kind of customer conversations, to create that shadow IT. So when we looked at how do we solve this and how do we take this forward, we needed to look a bit more at that federated ownership model. And each line of business in this scenario owns its own data-driven projects. But before you say, well, how do I control that? Well, actually, IT teams implement and maintain the common data governance and management, as well as shared analytics services for consistent and improved data processing and quality. But however, lines of businesses can effectively access and analyze their data to make it better, and also build out with more timely decisions to build on that business value. This sounds great, I suspect. However, let's take a bit of a step back, because I mentioned earlier on that before you build out of a cloud scale analytics, I want us to take a step back and explain about how the cloud adoption framework works and how it brings to fore something called Azure landing zones. Now, the cloud adoption framework has been used by thousands of Azure deployments to enable strategy, platform governance, migrations, operational models, and management baselines. It is also the reason that we have built cloud scale analytics on top as a addition to this framework. Now, before you can build out a cloud scale platform, analytics platform, you need to have the water, the gas, the electricity there. And this is really, if we take the analogy of how city utilities work, such as they have to have the water, gas, and electricity accessible before new houses are constructed. In this context, we're talking about the network, we're talking about the identity management, the policies, the management, and monitoring. And think of these as the utility services that are going to be ready to help streamline the application deployment business. And from a skilling point of view, the data engineer can no longer just be really data engineers. I'm not asking them to be absolute everything and understand everything, but there is now in this world, in the cloud world, the requirement perhaps to broaden the scope to understand just basics around cloud and infrastructure. So with that, let me take that step back and go into Azure landing zones, just so that we can get a baseline on these Azure landing zones. Now, Azure's landing zones is the cloud adoption framework is an architecture approach and reference implementation that enables effective constructions and operationalization of landing zones on Azure. It does it at scale, and it's aligned with the Azure roadmap. The Azure architecture provides kind of prescriptive guidance coupled with Azure best practices, and that is what we are doing here. And if I click on this picture here, we're going straight into a technical detail of an architecture diagram, but I want to just try and bring this together. For many organizations, it's the destination that you go to on your cloud adoption framework. It's mature, it's a scaled out, targeted architecture to help organizations operate. It also has a wealth of lessons learned. And you, at the moment, I suspect you're saying, well, where does data fit into this? Where am I going to put my data? So let me just try and drill through this. The Azure landing zone conceptual architectures shouldn't really be considered as abstraction, right? It's a consistent experience for both AppOps and DevOps, and it provides a unified and consistent control plane across all of these. Now, let us zoom in, as I say, because I appreciate this is going to be a very small graphic on your screen at this moment in time. But if we look at this here, we start at the top of thinking about the policies that we wish to apply to our platform. So in this scenario, we have the ability to say, okay, we're going to have some management group and subscription organization, and we are going to divide our setup into subscriptions, these Azure landing zone subscriptions, which are going to be platform subscriptions and landing zone subscriptions. Let me first deal with the actual platform subscriptions. There is no requirement, or should be no need, for you to have to set up multiple connectivity subscriptions. So you'll see down here, in this one down here, we have a connectivity subscription, but that is set up once. And that is set up so that then anytime we add any form of workload, be that an application or an analytics workload, and we deploy what we would call a landing zone subscription, it will automatically peer to the connectivity subscription. And at the same time, we can then go through further on this, and it allows us then to get this automatic subscription across here. We also have at the same time this management subscription. So we have this available to us here. This management subscription is all about where do we send our log analytics, where do we send our monitoring. And then finally, at the top here, we have our identity subscription. We finally, sorry, too many finallys. The where do we sit in this, and where does cloud scale analytics actually sit in this scenario as a scenario? Well, we're going to be creating these landing zones. We're going to be creating some very special type of landing zones that are for our data workloads and also for our data governance as well. And what do they look like? Well, they look a little bit like this. So for our guidance, we've talked about how Azure landing zones are kind of a strategic target. Well, we actually have Azure data management and data landing zones, which are designed to be the same foundational principles as any Azure landing zone. They're supposed to enable self-service, scalability, fast start, optimized. And the following factors are kind of built into this. So you have one data management landing zone. And that one data management landing zone is here today at the top here. But that can then be connected to multiple data landing zones. And these data landing zones aren't about, oh, I'm just going to put data into a storage account. These are complete data landing zones which have analytics in, they have data applications, they have a way of consuming the data. And at the same time, we can have multiple ones of them. So why would you have multiple data landing zones? Well, it could be these factors. It could be the organizational structure and data ownership. So how is the organization organized from a business perspective? And how is data owned across the organization? It could be that you've got multi-regional deployments in which, how many regions are you going to have? Will you have a single, or will it span across multiple regions? Are there data residency requirements that are needed to take into account? Quotas. So consider that subscription quotas aren't necessarily capacity guarantees and are applied on a per region basis. Then data sovereignty, due to kind of data sovereignty, I've just mentioned that, you might need another one. You might consider that you're going to have different Azure policies applied to this landing zone compared to this landing zone at the top here. So we're starting to see kind of a breakdown in different areas. So you can see these landing zones at the top here. At the same time, cost allocation, we appreciate you can obviously use resource groups within Azure to get that cost allocation, but you might actually want to separate it with a separate subscription to create a boundary for that cost application. And we're increasingly seeing with our customer base as well, the data classifications and highly confidential data, whereby our customers are considering putting highly confidential data into a separate landing zone, a subscription, and then doing just-in-time kind of access to that subscription. And then for a data mesh kind of deployment, we can consider this around our data domains, our latency, and our security. And Emerson and both Piethein and Espen will be going into that in the further session following this one. That's at a high level. But then what about our teams? We talked about how we need to have agility across our teams. And we've had to work with some of our customers to understand how that agility can come together. So adopting doesn't just do technology, but it also how do you operate. And the cloud scale analytics scenario also has prescribed guidance to help you consider how to skill your organization. It's extremely important you engage your end users throughout the kind of modernization process as you continue to evolve the platform and onboard new use cases. With that in mind, I am going to try and just zoom in a little bit on these slides because I appreciate they are a bit small in certain areas. So let us start just down at the bottom here. You'll see, if I can get it into the right location. So you will see at the same time. No, it hasn't quite done it. You will see down here that we have our platform groups. So our platform group here is actually responsible for defining common policies for our data landing zone. So they sit here in our team. They operate operates kind of the actual infrastructure that everything runs on. They help provide new subscriptions. They operate the cloud platform all up. Then you have the data landing zone group, and the data landing zone group consists of kind of two teams. We have this data landing zone ops who have their architects, and they're responsible for delivering kind of the operating and maintaining of a data landing zone. And the next point up here is then really putting that cross-domain teams in, making sure that we have a business owner who is a product owner in here, and they are responsible for delivering new data applications, which in turn produce multiple data products such as insights, reports, workloads. They also partner with different parts of the business and understand that, okay, this data application here has a dependency on another data application, and we need to pivot from really thinking of this as a project and a waterfall project to then moving along to, okay, we're going to have this as a program of work, we're going to have this as a product, and we're going to have it as maintained. Also, these teams are responsible for furnishing metadata in the data management landing zone catalog as well. Now, what does this look like? Now, we've given you two high-level ones. It's like a bit like this. So when we break it down, and this is some of the work that we have done with other customers, and appreciate again, we'll just zoom in on this. So when we look at a data management landing zone, which this is, the types of things that we are seeing that are being built out there are kind of an operational console. So we're seeing op consoles which are then creating kind of functionality behind them. It's kind of an illustration here of potential custom operation functions required for governance. But overall, Azure Purview, now known as Microsoft Purview, is really providing the data catalog and a lot of the governance functionality to the whole of the data landing zones. Equally, we think about kind of data quality in here, making sure that we have standard sets of rules that we can drive down, and data sharing contracts, and where does the master data and API catalog sit in there as well. A lot of this is kind of being built out as kind of custom applications. We have other customers who have built some of them out as power apps. I was with a customer a few weeks ago, and we managed to build out just a very, very simple data onboarding application. When we call data onboarding, that's registering a data asset. It's being able to then do maybe automated ingestion of that asset. And we managed to knock something up as a framework within like a couple of days. So it is all very possible, and that then interfaced into Purview. So it's a very simple way to go forward. But this is some of the things that you might want to consider in this space. And then we move on to what a data management landing zone looks like. It illustrates we've got different layers that are available here. So we have our core services layer, which is always built out, and that has our kind of data lake storage accounts. It has maybe a data agnostic ingestion engine. So how do I pull data from source, or how do I respond to data being placed into maybe a blob store, and then ingest that through to maybe my enriched layer. And then we want to enable that kind of agility for our teams as well. So we have these data applications, which are data products that we can then use tagging for. If we're looking at something called for mesh, or we're looking to be able to obviously see what applications belong to which particular business, we can then tag them as well. So in this case, we've got one of a product owner is John, and the domain is finance. Equally over this side, we have then a domain of support and a product owner of Sue. So, and you can have multiple of these data applications. But that gives you an oversight of where we're trying to go with the cloud scale analytics. The key for us is scalability every single time, the ability to add and to continue add without having to reset a number of the core services or to step back, so businesses can continue to go forward. They can develop their cloud model, and they can develop their skilling model as they go forward. With that, what I'd like to try and do is hand over to Emerson Gatchalian, who wants to take through Microsoft is taking what we've got as the cloud scale analytics, and working that into the Microsoft hybrid approach for data mesh and data fabric. Emerson.
We're going to be talking about the modern analytics and governance at scale. This is the Microsoft's hybrid approach to data mesh and data fabric. So our goal is, how are we going to take the cloud adoption framework, the cloud scale analytics framework, and build a specific framework, if you will, for data mesh and data fabric. Firstly, I would like to be very clear in regards to the Microsoft's position when it comes to data fabric or data mesh. Number one, Microsoft is focusing on the organization's challenges, their strategic vision, as opposed to a framework, build a framework and land it to the clients. What we have here is a composable solution, and I'm gonna go deeper into this a bit later. But our goal is focus on the specific needs of the clients, and then we'll land some of this composable or components of the bigger solution. Number two is Microsoft would like to provide the North Star of implementing modern analytics ecosystem, which is the technology, and how do we align the people and the processes. So a lot of our conversations with our clients, from CDOs, VP of data, to the director of analytics, to the architects, they're asking about, hey, you know what? I have these silos of different solutions. I have a data warehouse. I have a lakehouse. I have IoT solutions over here. But our challenge is how we're going to make all of these solutions unified. How are we going to operate the end-to-end data and analytics operations from the time we ingest the data all the way to federating this data to the different lines of businesses so that they can use this for their projects, right? So our goal is to provide that North Star. And what we did is take a lot of our implementations internally from Microsoft. We have a team in Microsoft Digital, who is actually working on our digital transformation that is related to data. So if you think about it, Microsoft is one of the biggest clients of Azure. We have a lot of data coming from Bing, coming from Xbox, coming from Azure. Imagine the amount of data we're generating by running Azure itself. So we took a lot of that implementation and we went through a lot of this, a lot of these iterations and journey. And what is the solution that we're using now is what we're sharing. On top of that, we are also working with a lot of organizations, a lot of our clients that have already implemented data mesh and data fabric. And so we would like to share that with you as well. So what we are sharing as part of that North Star is the combination of these implementations so that you don't have to think about, how should I do this? We can give you guidelines. We can give you the best practices. And the goal is to kind of provide it in here. There's a lot of content for this very specific topic, and I'm trying to kind of just compact it for 20 minutes. But I'm looking forward to connect with you and how we can, go deeper and understand how we're doing this with Microsoft. The third one is we support aspects of data mesh and data fabric, but we would like to be cautious that we are not purists in either of this framework. So I would like to give, I would like to give kudos to Zach Degani for the thought leadership on data mesh, our partners and organizations who are implementing data fabric. And this gives us the opportunity on how we're going to be able to use your kind of leaderships in these areas, make it more kind of like applicable for our clients. And hopefully this aligns according to your definition of this too. So I know Didem earlier discussed about the challenges from the different organizations. I'm not going to go deeper into what we've heard right now, given that she already covered that. But I would like to highlight 2 or 3 things around this, what we've heard with our clients. Earlier, I discussed about clients, CDOs, VPN data, directors, what have you. They're looking for ways on how do we build the data and analytics foundation and operationalization. We are in a business that we are now operating data as a data product. We're from raw data to a data product. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that the infrastructure is there to support our needs? Number 2 is data governance. We've started all this kind of like amazing kind of like vision when it comes to machine learning, AI, would like to build all these insights. And we have clients, unfortunately, that went through the kind of like the goal in building the project, but 6 months down the road, they realize, hey, you know what? We're not able to be successful in this project because A, the data is dirty. B, data is not integrating. There's a lot of data that we need to go through to find the right data for this project. So data governance is really, really important. The other thing that also didn't mention is the cost of data engineering. Over the whole cycle of this implementation, 70 to 80% of this is ingestion and engineering. And our clients are asking, how can we make it easier so that the data agility improves? How do we kind of like enable the lines of businesses? We'd have to go into this tedious job of ingestion and data engineering. And so with that, I would like to proceed to the next one. So I'll start with a traditional implementation and how we're going to evolve to a data mesh. So if we have already implemented modern data warehouse or have done, say, data warehouse or Hadoop migration, you probably are looking at this kind of like, conceptual architecture. Data gets in through ADF, landed in the data lake, start cleaning the data using Spark, and then hosting that data into a data warehouse, and then the reports will consume them. If you think about it, a lot of our clients are saying, hey, you know what? This is the monolithic approach. Our challenge right now is the central team, the shared services team, or the data office team. We are trying to kind of build all these projects for the different lines of businesses. The big challenge that we have is we are not the experts when it comes to building these reports or machine learning models, what have you. They are the experts. So just the handshake of kind of like transferring the knowledge from the lines of businesses to the shared service is a big challenge. It takes months, if you will, right? And also think about how we're implementing these different projects. Think about a data warehouse, this one data warehouse trying to kind of cram all these projects, and how do you orchestrate all these projects so that one is not going to affect or cause any problems to the other. So a lot of our clients saying, hey, you know what, we need to kind of empower our lines of businesses. We need to kind of enable them so that they can build their own dashboards and reports. They have data scientists. They know about this data. We need to enable them so that they can build their own machine learning. So what we're trying to do with a lot of our clients is how do we evolve them from this monolithic kind of implementation to a federated one? So if you think about it, the existing implementation, we can take it as a shared service domain. We don't have to rip and replace anything that you've built. Your lakehouse is the foundation, and that is the move forward. 100% keep that, continue on with the lakehouse approach. In terms of the ingestion and data bricks, some of these are manually done. Some would have the metadata ingestion framework, but still not enough. So how can we automate some of this? I'm going to go deeper in a little bit. So coming from this shared services kind of mindset, how can we start federating this so that we can start building the different domains for the different lines of businesses? So as an example, you can start. You can still keep the shared services here, but you can start enabling your marketing, for example, marketing line of business. Usually they have their own data engineers, they have their own data scientists, they have very agile kind of approach in kind of like deploying their insights. Some of them are ad hoc as well because they need to be kind of like very advanced in terms of how they're approaching a lot of these data products, if you will. So we can start building these domains. I'm going to go deeper into this a bit later. Keep the data inside your central data storage and keep tenants per domain so that you can, or the different lines of businesses can have their own tenant storage. We can start building their data products. So if we're going to go deeper into what we're trying to provide here is we are creating different domains for different lines of businesses. The different lines of businesses then can start kind of building our data products. These are projects that are related to dashboards and report, machine learning, operational data hubs, IoT, and analytics. But in the middle, if you notice here, governance is at the heart of all of this. The automated services is also a part of this, and also the polyglot data store. I'm going to go deeper into this a bit later, but what I would like to show here is if you look at the four principal pole of data mesh. Number one is the domain data-driven ownership. So as you can see, we're federating the ownership of data across the different lines of businesses. And number two is self-serve infrastructure as a platform. How we're moving forward with these domains is we are recommending templates. As a matter of fact, we have available templates right now that you can start with. So you can build, a domain with all the networking components, with all the security requirements, monitoring, what have you, and that's part of that. So by doing this, we're actually enabling self-serve analytics. on the infrastructure side. I'm going to talk more about the ingestion side, the data side, self-serve data side a bit later, but that's the component that we have here. Data as a product, this is where the different lines of business are going to be building their own insights and start kind of sharing some of this data product across the different domains. And then the other one is the federated computational governance. So this one comes in two components. One is data governance, which, related to the data cataloging, classification, lineage. But the second part of that is about the governance when it comes to providing policy on how we're going to keep the data, how we're going to kind of implement the different domains, the integration points, the networking, the security, and all of that. So with that, I'm going to go deeper into one of the components, which is the enterprise data governance. Regardless of data mesh, data fabric, data warehouse, what have you, very foundational is enterprise data governance. We have Azure Purview right now, and there's a lot more features coming out of Azure Purview. But why we need this? We need to automate the scanning of your environment, may it be on-premise in Azure or third-party cloud. We need to make sure that you have the information by building this catalog automatically after you scan that data. And then now you have understanding about the metadata that you have per data set. You can start looking at the lineage once you have to build that map and that catalog. You will have data owners for that, descriptions about the data sets, the columns, what have you. One important thing that is very, very critical is the data classification. We have conversations with a lot of our clients, and when we ask how many confidential data that you know, and the answer is, I know what I know, but because we have so much data, it is hard for us to say that we have confidential data out there that we are not aware. So by using the automated data classification, you are removing that risk of finding those specific confidential data. And we are working with a lot of our partners as well, because they have classification capabilities that we can augment and add more if you need more, more customized classification. We have in Purview our own custom classification as well. So that is an accelerator, an enabler for you to make sure that you're classifying your data properly. Why classification is important? It's aligned to the data policy, because once you know your data is confidential, you can apply the data policy so that every single confidential data will be kind of like masked, or kind of reduce the security only to the data owner. So that policy will automate all that data management, making sure that you are not exposing your confidential data to the public or to people who do not need access to them. The last one that I would like to mention here is the data use governance. If you're thinking about data mesh or data fabric, you need to enable the data use governance. Meaning, me as a line of business, if I need to actually have access to the data, I'm looking at the data catalog, I see the metadata, I see the lineage, and I need this data, but I don't have access to it. With the data use governance, I can request access directly if that data is in Azure now. You can access to that. It will go through the queue. The data owner will approve it. And once you have that's approved, then you have access to that data, and you can start with the exploration or use that data for your insights that you would like to build. Moving on, just checking time here. The automated in data analytics operations. This is an IP that we took from Microsoft Digital Transformation. And a lot of this too is working with our partners on how we can enable some of these automated data and analytics operations. So the goal here is to have an operations console. How do we, say, for example, onboard a new line of business? Say you have a new project and it's a domain on its own. Say you purchase a new company and it's a domain on its own. So through the operations console, you can onboard the new lines of businesses. And because all these domains are based on templates, and you can pick the services that you need, you will be able to onboard this lines of business very, very quickly. So the next one is data products onboarding or data source onboarding. Say, for example, we have new projects, we got data that is not in Azure yet. You can onboard your data coming from, say, Oracle on-prem or SQL Server on-prem. So coming from the data catalog, you can take the metadata and then the data sources. And then from them, you can ingest or kind of input that to your metadata-driven ingestion so that now this data will start flowing from on-prem to Azure. Why this is important is because if you are serving analytics from your operational databases on-prem, a lot of the feedback that we're getting from our clients is, we're not going to allow that because already our performance is not there, and to put analytics on top of it is a big problem. Number two is security. We cannot just allow multiple analytic scenarios for our operational environment. The governance is much easier if you kind of take it from an analytics environment. So that's number one. So going to the process then, how do we accelerate that data engineering is now by enabling the data standardization automatically. For example, data is coming as a CSV, TSV, you can start converting it to a delta, which is our recommendation right now. And the next one is apply light data quality. There are data out there that are like duplicated. Start removing the duplicates. Start aligning the different time zone. Check if the data is within the threshold, as an example. So those are light data quality work that will speed up data engineering so that you don't have to kind of tediously put it in your code every single time you need to clean that data. Next one is the metadata registration, meaning as the data is now onboarded in Azure, you can start pushing that data into the catalog so that's immediately available for other users or other domains to kind of discover your data. And then last one is access provisioning, because you're requested to have access to this data, you will have access to it. You can also add specific Azure Active Directory groups to have access to this very specific data. So if you think about it, by automating a lot of this, light data engineering work, the goal is now how do we kind of ingest and data engineer at scale to meet that data agility that you're looking for. So with that, then, data is now flowing. It's getting into the polyglot data store. I'm just going to touch upon this very, very quickly. A lot of data is coming into the data lake, structured data, unstructured data, but there's a lot of data that is coming from on-prem as well. There's a lot of operational databases, for example, data marts that are just being migrated from, say, SQL Server on-prem to Azure SQL databases. Those data is still your data, and we don't really recommend you to kind of migrate that data into the data lake. Keep it where it is because that's your operational data. You might be modernizing your applications and what have you. You might have an IoT solution where you're using NoSQL database or Cosmos database. You need this to be as part of your polyglot data store. So all this data you can share to the different domains. So as we are picking data, say, for example, data coming from the shared services here, and then going into combining it with the marketing data, and then now you can build a data product. And you can build multiple products from this different tenant storage within that polyglot data store. Now, coming into the different domains, right? These are the domains that we're talking about. How should we architect for it? So the common challenge that we're hearing from clients is building this Lego blocks of services is just too complex for us. Think about the security. Think about the integration points. Think about the seven enterprise requirements that we need to be able to architect for this specific line of business. So we heard you. Our clients are saying there should be a better way to do this, and we heard you, and that's why we built Synapse, Azure Synapse Analytics. Azure Synapse Analytics is an ecosystem where you have orchestration and integration. Orchestration and integration here is actually the same code base as we have with Azure Data Factory. So this is not something new that we just built. This is just something new that we packaged together for you so that you don't have to. So all of that Azure Data Factory capabilities are here. Management of the pipelines, the clusters, monitoring them is also part of the whole ecosystem. But one thing that I would like to kind of drill a bit deeper is what are the different engines that we have in Synapse? So Synapse is not just a data warehouse. It's a very small portion of what we are delivering. It's a data warehouse, but with machine learning. A traditional data warehouse that you will find in the market, you will have to pull the data out of the data warehouse to be able to do machine learning, put in the lake. That's a big challenge for our clients, big banks, healthcare, what have you. There's terabytes and petabytes of data, and imagine pulling that data from the data warehouse just to do machine learning. So rather than doing that, we bring you the machine learning code so you can start scoring your data that is inside the data warehouse. Spark, so by the way, SQL Data Warehouse is not new in Synapse. This started from way back PDW, the SQL Data Warehouse. This is years and years already. We just put this in one ecosystem, so this is not new. Spark deployment, this is the open source Spark. This is also nothing new. This is by the community who actually contributed to Spark. We are contributing heavily on this as well. And this enables you to have data engineering and machine learning. Next one is the serverless capabilities. This is now giving you the capability, if you have the data in the lake, be like TSB, Parquet, what have you, giving you the capability to start exploring that data without having to build tables. without having to kind of prepare the table before you can do just exploration. So this is a serverless capability where you can write SQL on top of your data inside SQL. And then the last one that we have here is Azure Data Explorer. Again, this is a standalone service that we had, Azure Data Explorer. We're using it in Azure to monitor our logs, what have you. So this is a capability that we tied inside Synapse so that all the time series needs that you have IoT, if you want to do real-time or digital twin capabilities, this is the data store that will serve that data to you very, very quickly. Integration points, this is the important one that I would like to mention, because now within the Synapse, it's tightly integrated with the data governance. So from within Synapse, you can start to look for data, the business glossary, the data catalog, for example. Data sharing is one important one that a lot of our clients are leveraging right now. Why this is important is if you have a data in a data warehouse, you can share that data and land it into a third-party provider, like for optimization, what have you, or other purposes. But you can land it in the receiver's data lake. This is not a proprietary, like it has to be a data warehouse. No, this is flexible because you can land this data in a data lake somewhere else, in a subscription, in a domain, so on and so forth. Machine learning is our hub for machine learning capabilities. We have tight integration with there so that all the models that we have actually implemented there or kind of built there, we can score and deploy into the machine learning that we have in data warehouse. Lastly is dashboards and reports. You can start building reports, dashboards, what have you, from within Synapse. So with all that said, all I can say is we try to simplify the implementation of your analytics environment. By doing this, you don't have to stitch all the different services, and gives you the capability and agility to kind of enable the different lines of businesses so that they can do their own analytics. And so how do we align to the data mesh? If you look at the literature from data mesh, there's 3 planes. There's the mesh experience plane, which equates to the data governance that we were talking about. There is the data products plane that talks about how do we create, how do we read the version, the security of that data. We include that in our data operations, and we automated it as well. The next one is the utility plane. How do you make sure that the networking is proper, the CI/CD, the access control, and data transformation? This is what we put inside our domain. We have templates, and we made it a lot simpler as well with Synapse on how you're deploying this analytics environment. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Espen and Piethein on how you can apply this and build a data mesh in your organization.
Thanks, Emerson. So my name is Piethein Strengholt. I'm a senior cloud solution architect. And we also have Espen.
Hello, so my name is Espen. I'm a principal architect in Microsoft.
You go ahead, Espen.
Yes, please move to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you very much. So over the last couple of years, we've had multiple engagements with customers and helping them to implement data mesh. The questions I get a lot of questions, and one of the questions I probably get the most is how to separate between the different platforms. So a key aspect is decentralization of the data ownership, and like Emerson just referred to, the domain orientation. So Piethein, how do you see this? Do you see any distribution of data between domains?
Excellent question. Well, data mesh in itself is really about decentralization, making teams accountable for operating their data end-to-end and distributing data across. And when I talk to people, I learn they find domain-oriented data ownership the hardest part of data mesh. And I feel the difficulty here relies in domain-driven design. So data mesh refers to domain-driven design as a best practice or methodology to identify those different data domains. But as a methodology, it was originally, I think, conceived as a methodology for software engineering. So when you develop complex systems, so within those boundaries, it works really well. And I think it hasn't been a methodology developed for modeling your enterprise data or identifying data domains in a larger data architecture. So then the question is how to identify your data domains. And my recommendation, so first recommendation would be is really to look at the scope and understand the different problem spaces you're trying to address. And I feel it's important to do this exercise first before jumping straight into the details of your technical implementation and your architecture. And this also aligns with domain-driven design, because there it says, well, you should set logical boundaries around the problem spaces, because when doing so, the responsibilities are clear and will be better managed. So for grouping these different problem spaces, I encourage you and recommend you to look at your business architecture. And within business architecture, there are business capabilities and abilities. These are abilities to achieve a specific business purpose or objective or outcome. And such an abstraction packs data, processes, organization, and technology together within a particular context and aligns this to your strategic business goals and objectives. And what you see here on the screen is such a decomposition. So we created a fictitious company called Tailwind Traders. And the overview you see here is called a business capability map. And this company needs to master all of these business capabilities in order to be successful. So for example, you see here a business capability called online ticket management. And you could imagine, so without selling any tickets to your customers, you cannot do properly your business. And what you probably also will observe in practice is that most of your people are also organized around these business capabilities. And those people also typically share the same language, so they use the same vocabulary. And the same holds also typically for the applications you will see behind such a business capability. So those are typically well aligned and also typically also tightly connected based on the cohesion and the activities they need to support. So therefore, coming back to how to identify your data domains, I feel business capability mapping is a great starting point for identifying your data domains.
Yes, you talk about the business capabilities, but data mesh refers to bounded context. Would you say that that's the same as the business capability?
Not exactly. So excellent question. Well, business capabilities and bounded context aren't exactly the same, but they are strongly related. So business capability is a bit more abstract. So you could either implement them once or multiple times. And when you start implementing, you will see the solution space, and bounded contexts there are for setting boundaries on such a solution space. So the design of your systems and application and data. So things become much more concrete. And it's also the area where the alignment and focus of the solution space makes sense. And typically also you see, like I said before, you see high cohesion and strong alignment also in such a space. And to better manage your enterprise architecture, I would recommend to think of aligning your business capabilities and your domains and your bounded contexts. This is no hard rule, but just a recommendation for you.
Got it. Understood. Can we look at what this would look like in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me show the screen here. So what you see here on the screen are different domains and also the collaboration between those. So on the left, so let me use my pointer. Here you see source system aligned domains. So you see transactional operational applications where data is created within, managed for the purpose of these operational use cases. What you also see here is a data product service. So these are services needed for taking the data out of these complex systems and turning the data into a data product. And then on the right-hand side, you see a consuming aligned domain, so another domain. This domain consumes data from other domains, combines, integrates it, transforms it for their own analytical use case, for example. But such a domain could also create new data and share that data again across to other domains. So in that respect, a data consumer can also become a data producer.
So does that mean that you use the products as a way of removing the dependencies between the domains?
Absolutely. So spot on. So this is where these data products, they play a vital role in that part. So when performing cross-domain boundary integration or data distribution across domains, it's important to decouple your inner architecture from all of your different data consumers for flexibility and agility. And the best way of doing this is by taking your data out of your transactional and operational applications and turning that into a data product and providing this data product to other different data domains.
I see. So in each one of these, I see you have data product services. Would you please explain those?
Yeah, those services are really needed to create such a data product. And in Azure context, well, you could see this, for example, as a resource group with a bunch of pre-configured services. And this typically also comes from a template, like Emerson referred to in the beginning. He said, well, we need to make this template based in order to excel and accelerate. So this is where these data product services are for. And also in a way, this is where cloud scale analytics is also for.
Understood.
Great. So maybe let's switch roles, and I would like to ask you some questions, Espen. So Mike,
Please do.
in his story, he introduced these different data management landing zones for the data management layer, and these different data landing zones for the layer of turning data into value and creating data products. So how would you see the mapping between those and these different domains and the discussion we had so far?
Yes, thank you. So when creating a subscription in Azure, there are certain things that needs to be true to ensure that your environment is secure, reliable, and scalable. Like as a company, you want to ensure that your teams are self-serviced. You want to do that, but you cannot compromise on security. So to do that requires you to have a composition of a set of services, actually, across networking, across what do we call Azure policies and authentication, among others. So together, all of these things, we put them together and we call that a landing zone, like Mike initially introduced. So I love the analogy that he was using of building a house, because like you expect certain things to be in place. You expect certain things to already be there, provided to you by for instance, the municipal. Like you expect water, electricity, a sewage system, and so on. And it's the same thing when you are building a landing zone. Like the data engineers, or let's say you have the data scientists, they want to focus on doing what they do best. They want to create those data products that you just talked about. And the company, they want, on their side of things, they want to prohibit unintended data exfiltration or publicly exposing endpoints. And they want to allow, say, creation of value from the data that they have in the data lake and avoid it turning into a data swamp. So using these capabilities provisioned as part of the landing zones, we ensure that the developers, they are free to build the products, but without compromising on any of the company's policies, whether that should be security or other. So there's another saying that I like, and it is they use the right tool for the right job. And that means going back to those teams, like sometimes when they build a product, they want to use a Spark pool. Emerson introduced Synapse. Synapse has a lot of different options. So sometimes the Spark pool is the right tool to create, let's say, aggregations of 100 of different files. And sometimes it's that ADX cluster where you have millions of time series records that you want to create analytics on top of. So like these different tools goes into each end of the different products, and each of the different teams want to be able to select the tool that is right for them for that specific job. Mike and I, both Mike actually and Emerson, also talked about polyglot storage. And it's the same thing when it comes to storage. Sometimes it's always actually when using the right storage technology for the specific type of job. So sometimes that means having a data product with a columnar store. Sometimes that means a data lake, and each data product might have different requirements for both how they are serving the data and how they're consuming the data.
Thanks. Maybe a question in that respect. So why can't you, I see two layers, why can't you merge the data management landing zone and the data landing zone?
Sure, you can. But my boss has a good saying, and even though you can, doesn't mean you should. So we expect different people or different teams to be responsible for these two landing zones. And they have very different functions and very different purposes. So the data management landing zone is a single central entity to govern across all the different domains and all the different data products. And then you want to separate the privileges between the people or the team that are managing them and the people that are creating or operating the data products. So there is definitely a lot of different reasons for why we recommend. And there will always be like at least one of the data management and n number of the data landing zones. And another thing that's important to mention is that you lose out of the scalability if you decide to put everything into one subscription.
Makes sense perfectly. So let's move over to another pattern. Here you see now on the screen different data landing zones. So could you explain, why is this and when to use such a pattern? Is this for technical separation, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Spot on. And this is absolutely my preferred pattern or the recommended pattern, because there are a lot of things that you should take into consideration when you design the architecture. So the key is to use what we like to refer to as subscription democratization, and to use the subscription as the method to enable that scaling. So you look at different aspects. One could be data sovereignty. Like there could be, we have different regulations. In Europe, we have GDPR. In US, you have things like California Consumer Privacy Act, and I'm sure there's lots of different ones like this that has a requirement from a regulatory perspective. Sorry, not native English. That the data has to reside in either a specific region or in a specific country. So things like that. Networking is another important aspect, like a data landing zone. When you provision that, it's provisioned with a virtual network, and that gives you a VNet. And those VNets are regionally bound. So every new region implies a new VNet, and that in a new landing zone, and then you need to ensure to have those peered to have cross communication between those different domains. When cross communication between domains brings up another one, which is latency. So two aspects of that, or at least two aspects of that, I look towards the different domains that are collaborating a lot, especially when it comes to large amounts of data. Because as you know, if you take large amounts of data across two different regions with some distance between, that will add latency. So that's something that you want to avoid. Also look at the latency when it comes to the compute side of things or the end user side of things, because you might have applications that are super chatty, and super chatty applications require or is recommended to have in close proximity to the data. Actually, and all kinds of compute, what you want to work towards is reduce the distance between the compute and the storage of that data. And that's especially true when it comes to chatty applications. So that's an important aspect. Other things that are important to take into consideration, cost. Mike briefly mentioned cost. It's a very clean cut for allocating cost. It's not the only way. Like you can use things like tags. Each resource in Azure can be tagged and thereby use that to allocate cost. But the cleanest and easiest way to allocate cost, let's say it's internally between different departments, is using a subscription. Then other aspects is security. So some deployments or some configurations specifically around some specific services have a requirement for elevated privileges, maybe to do operations on some of these services. And what you want to ensure then is that when you give someone those elevated privileges for that specific use case, you want to limit the scope. So the scope is only in the domain that they are already working. So you don't want to give someone elevated privileges across multiple domains unless it is actually intended, and that's what you want to do. Then there is another one that's maybe not so important, but that's when it comes to limits. So all subscriptions, there are some services that are some limits that are tied to subscriptions. Some services has some limits. So it's good to have that or keep that in the back of your mind when you design the architecture as well, to think about those limits, know they're there, and design around them. So the best way to avoid hitting any of them is to you go with this first principle of subscription democratization, and it'll never be a problem.
Thanks. So What you just described to me are more technical concerns for separation. Do you also see functional boundaries which can be input for separating different domains?
Certainly. And what we've seen, at least with customers, is that they differentiate also sometimes between what is source system aligned versus what's consumer aligned. So that means they take everything that comes from a source system and tie those things together, and then look at what are the consumers of those different products, and then tie those things together. So that's another way of doing it.
Cool. And maybe then one last, maybe stupid question, but should
Yeah.
all the company's data then be persisted inside such a single data landing zone?
No, it's not a stupid question at all, and there's no such thing as stupid questions. And actually, because it's a very important topic to keep in mind, because data never exists on its own. It's never a standalone island. There's no application without data. You can say you have as stateless as you want. There's always something being persisted somewhere. And the same thing with data. There's no use for data without an application. So these two things needs to coexist always. And that's why it's so important to put the data architecture, make that part of your enterprise architecture. Take all the application operations into consideration as well when you design your data domains and when you design your data architecture. That's absolutely critical.
Thank you very much. This really helps. And what we would like to do next is to give you a short demo how such a data mesh architecture would look like in practice. And for this, we will use Microsoft Purview. So let me stop sharing the screen and move over to a real life demo. Yes, I hope by now everybody can see my screen. So what you see here is, well, recently it was called Azure Purview, but the new name is now Microsoft Purview. But this is our unified data governance solution. So it has a catalog, it has a data map for collecting all of the metadata. It does scanning, profiling, classifications, end-to-end lineage, and so much more. So when we use and look through the lens of data governance to data mesh. So how would that look like then in action? So here on the left-hand side, I click on, this is my data map. And this is a technical viewpoint now I use to look at all of my different systems and data assets. So you see the company name over here and those three different domains I referred to in the beginning. So online ticket management, partnership and communication, and customer services. It's just a selection we made, but just for demonstration purposes only. Next, you see behind or below such a domain of these different operational applications. But what we also see, so here one data product sits. So the complex data has been taken out of this SQL Server application and it has been moved into what is now being called here a data product. So this is nice and really gives an overview of the different domains. If we move back and, for example, look at the glossary and more on a business level, so look at the business metadata, how then would things look like? So here you see all the glossary terms, so the business terms. And these are also grouped by those different domains. So you see the same domain, so customer services, online ticket management, and again, partnership and communication. So when I expand any of these, you can click through, you see here the product, including a definition. And here we also learn and see, well, this business term also is linked to a data asset. So when we click further down, you see what is the actual data asset then. So more on a technical level. If I move back and would browse my assets again, and for example, would jump into online ticket management, we could scroll down here on the left-hand side and look at the classifications. And here in this respect, so for example, I created a custom classification called data product. So when I would select this one, I would see all the data products. And here again, I also see one, this one has been certified. So we at least know it's in a good shape. And when I click further and I see the details, I would have hoped my request data access button would, here again. So when refreshing, so when I click through and I see this data products, I could even here click on this request access button and start asking for accessing this actual data product. So I could type in the reason why I would like to get access to this data product, and then really a data workflow will kick in, and the data owner of this data product will receive a notification, and he will see, well, this person then, in that case, so myself, will request access to this data product then, and could approve the data access. And then really truly behind the scenes, really the data access management will also be changed. So you could even manage data access from Purview itself. So build out your true data marketplace in that respect. So this brings me to the end also of my demo. And now I would like to hand it over to Marvin and Hamood.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Marvin. My name is Marvin, and
sure. Thank you. Thanks, Marvin. Thanks, Espen and Piethein, for that excellent overview of domain-driven design and how organizations can adopt data mesh thinking. So I'm going to wear my customer hat and assume I'm a technical architect at Tailwind, the company that Piethein introduced in the previous session, our travel company, which is interested in all of this. But as you can imagine, I have a lot of questions. So to help with that, I have Marvin with me from Microsoft, who will help us understand how to get started with the implementation aspect of this. Welcome, Marvin.
thanks, Hamood. Thanks for having me. And yeah, sure, let's get started looking into how the cloud scale analytics can help you set up a data mesh architecture.
So I have watched the previous presentations, and I really enjoyed learning about the content. But where can I go to learn more about this cloud scale analytics? Can we start with that?
Sure, that's a really good question. So today we have actually multiple artifacts that I would like to share with you today, and that help you on your cloud scale analytics journey. So the first one I would like to call out is the guidance that is publicly available today in the Cloud Adoption Framework on Microsoft Docs under the short link AKMS/adopt/cloud scale analytics that you can also find here. And the documentation includes best practices around security, governance, policies, network setup, access control, and a lot more. And hereby, as mentioned previously, we consider 80% of it to be prescriptive and 20% of it being customizable based on the customer requirements, based on the industry, and so on and so forth. So in summary, this asset really provides you with a prescriptive architecture designed by SMEs. It's documented end-to-end, and it helps you get up and running much faster and reduce the time to value inside your data platform.
That's great. It's always useful to have a manual in your hands when you're building something. So let me ask you this. What else is available to get organizations like ours started with this?
So the second artifact that I would like to share with you today is our reference implementation. So the reference implementation that we have built provides you with the core infrastructure artifacts to set up the data platforms such as data mesh. So overall, these artifacts reduce the time, as not every customer has to start from scratch, right? And you can use these to get started on your data mesh journey much more quickly. So the repositories come actually with various deployment options, including the option to use a deploy to Azure button with a customized Azure portal deployment experience. And of course, there are also CI/CD pipeline options, right? So that you can deploy the solution using Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, depending on what you would like to use. And what I would like to mention also is that all the services and all the core infrastructure that is pre-configured according to best practices, right? Based on the experience that we had with other customers, based on the learnings in the energy industry, for example, pharma industry, but also others. And lastly, I just want to emphasize that the reference architecture as well as the reference implementation has been tested and validated with customers. But that's not all. So the code artifacts, they are open and publicly available today on GitHub at no cost. So the various architectural solutions are split across a set of repositories, and they can be found within the Azure GitHub organization. But that's not all. On top of that, we have also been working on templates for data applications, which can then be used by customers to be able to much more quickly also realize value and insights inside their data landing zone, right? So these data application templates can then be used to quickly spin up a use case environment inside your data landing zone, which can then be handed over to a project team to start evaluating the data and generate insights. And these teams can then much more quickly develop data products, which can then be shared within an organization. So there's a template today available for batch use cases, there's one for streaming use cases, and there's one for analytical purposes, such as data science and machine learning. So Hamood, what do you think about those artifacts?
That's terrific. Thanks for sharing all these resources. I love the wealth of information and the infrastructure as code in the form of templates that comes with all of this, so we can get started quickly. So let's say that we at Tailwinds are excited to get started. How do we start deploying the data platform? Where do we begin? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So we should actually first make sure that the foundation has been set up, right? So we are always recommending our customers to first adopt the Cloud Adoption Framework and the core Azure Landing Zone Framework, as this will help you to set up the core infrastructure for network, identity, monitoring, and a lot more. That is actually required for any landing zone and not just our data environment. And once that has been done, we can start building on top of that, right? And we can start deploying the data management landing zone. And this is the first cloud scale analytics artifact that really is here to enable anything related to data management and governance and acts as a core instance for these purposes. And on top of that, now we can start setting up our data landing zones, which can be separated based on a number of factors that were mentioned previously, like data domains, cost allocation, location, data classification, or other legal implications.
I really like what I'm seeing here. I see Microsoft's cloud adoption framework at the base. I see a data management landing zone, which gives me the ability to govern my data platform. This is perfect. So let's talk about the next steps for our company. Let's say we now need some help with identifying how many landing zones we should deploy. So we've identified a couple of data domains, such as travel management, customer management, and corporate functions, such as finance, HR, and other supporting services. We, as at Tailwinds, are concerned about sharing costs between these three functions, i.e., the travel management, the customer management, and the corporate functions. How does this pattern help us split the costs across all of these? In addition to this, our business units would like to create a self-service data platform so teams can develop independently, so that domains can own their data and give access to whoever requests that data across the organization. So my question for you is, Marvin, how would this look like in a data mesh pattern? How can we structure our data landing zones? What do the beginnings of data mesh look like for Tailwind, keeping in mind our broad range of functions that I just described earlier and our strict data residency requirements, given that we're based in Europe?
Thanks, Hamood, for providing these super valuable insights of your business. So lots of questions, and based on the provided details, I would propose to split your data estate across 3 data landing zones. One for the customer domain, one for the travel domain, and one for the corporate functions. And each landing zone will have to land into a separate subscription for scale and separation of duties. And it will also allow you to allocate costs easily, right? As it was one of your requirements. And even though your data platform is now split across multiple subscriptions, you can still rely on in-place data sharing between these data landing zones without having to maintain multiple copies of the same data set across multiple storage accounts. And each of these landing zones would then be deployed into West Europe to be compliant with the data residency restrictions that you mentioned. Inside each of these landing zones, we can now start realizing value through the data applications, right? And throughout automation, we can then realize a self-service platform that can be used by any use case team within your organization.
Great. And on that point about realizing value, I'm super excited to realize the value of data mesh. And as was rightly pointed out earlier by Piethein, the most important thing for Tailwinds is the ability to sell airline tickets and travel packages. for this reason, we would like to focus on our customers first. We'd like to start small and scale as needed in the future by onboarding new domains. For now, we'd like to start with focusing on our customer to make sure we're delivering the best value to them. We want to start by deploying a single landing zone where we can start integrating our data and start building a data product that allows us to run reporting to look for insights on customer behavior, for example, and spending patterns as they purchase travel products from us. We're also thinking of utilizing Azure's AI offerings to build a travel recommendation engine so we can offer our customers deals based on their travel preferences, or even do things like recommending local attractions to them. I'm wondering how cloud scale analytics can help us with achieving these goals, and whether all of this sounds realistic.
It sounds very reasonable. So the great thing about cloud scale analytics is that it allows you to start small and grow your data estate over time, right? So based on your feedback, I would propose to get started with a single data landing zone for the customer domain first, right? And then later on, you can extend the data platform with additional data landing zones for the travel domain and the corporate data domain. And inside the first landing zone, we can then start focusing on the customers and start developing the recommendations use case you just mentioned. So should we get started with the deployment? What do you think?
Absolutely. Let's dive into it. I'm really excited to see this in action.
Sure. Let me first walk you through the deployment of your data management zone and the data landing zone. So what we will look at now is we will start at the data management zone repository, and we will use the deploy to Azure button to initiate the first deployment of your data management zone and your data landing zone. So what we can see here is actually, as mentioned, the data management zone repository. If we scroll down on the README file in any of the repositories, we will find those blue buttons, which you can use to initiate the deploy to Azure button deployment experience. This will bring us to the Azure portal and will bring us to a customized portal environment or front end. And here you have to provide a couple of details, right? So you have to say in which subscription we should deploy the data management zone, in which region, of course. In your case, that's West Europe, and we're using ESA1 subscription. Then you have to provide a prefix that will be used for all the resources that are getting deployed inside the subscription as a prefix. The same then applies for your data landing zones. So here we are just deploying one, we're using ESA2, and we are using West Europe as a region. Again, we need to provide a prefix and then also a password, as some of the services that we are deploying require a password. For example, the virtual machine scale set on which we are hosting the self-hosted integration runtime. Lastly, you can also deploy an Azure Bastion, which we will do here. Then you can apply some tags. And lastly, there's a review and create process where we run some final validation to check whether all the inputs are looking good. And then you can hit the create button. And you will end up with the first data landing zone and data management zone. So these were briefly the steps to deploy those two landing zones, right? So do you have any questions, Hamood?
Yes, absolutely. Now that I have the data management landing zone and a data landing zone set up, what I'm wondering is what actually gets deployed inside my subscriptions. Can you talk a bit about that?
That's a great question. So let's actually now look into our subscriptions to understand the setup. So that's actually what we will see now is the two subscriptions that we have been using before for the initial deployment, right? So ESA1 was our data management zone, ESA2 was our data landing zone. And we will now look at what has been deployed. So what we will see here is, as mentioned, ESA1 and ESA2, and there are a number of resource groups that have been deployed through the deployment and created. So first we will look at the governance resource group. And in here, we will find our central purview instance, which will be used for all your governance tasks across all data landing zone. And if we, for example, look here into the networking section, you can see everything is pre-configured according to best practices. So we are disallowing public network access. And also all the services get deployed with private endpoints across the board, and if supported, of course. Besides that, in the data management zone, we also have a container registry, for example, for Docker images that are used across all landing zone. And we also have, for example, a couple of consumption resources here. For example, the Synapse Private Link Hub to also privately access the Synapse Studio across all data landing zones and across all data applications. So there's more, but let's look into the data landing zone. And in the data landing zone, also a number of resource groups have been created. And let's first look into the storage resource group. And here you will find 3 data lakes. One is actually the raw data lake, one is an enriched and curated layer. And then we also have a workspace layer, which can be used as a scratch space for the application teams. In addition to that, we also have a resource group for external storage accounts, which are used mostly for push patterns. So if, for example, a certain scenario requires you to push data from source system to Azure and requires an account key, this is what you use. Then we have a couple of shared integration resources where we have a data factory and a Databricks workspace, which are used for your metadata ingestion framework, or many customers use it for that. The same applies for products. So we have a few shared product resources, again, a Databricks workspace as well as a Synapse workspace that can be shared among data application teams. And then we also have a few metadata resources that are used once for the MySQL server is used as a Hive metastore, and we have a SQL server and SQL database, which is used for the metadata ingestion framework. Lastly, we have a runtimes resource group that is used for actually hosting the self-hosted integration runtime on a virtual machine scale set. And from here, it can be shared among other data factories. And then we also end up with a couple of resource groups that are empty actually, but you can start using then those for your data applications to start building your data products and then share these data products later on among the organization. So this is what the data landing zones and the data management landing zone contain. So do you have any questions about that, Hamood?
Well, first of all, thank you for that walkthrough of the data landing zone. As I hinted earlier, we're looking to quickly realize value. And also, we're looking to be able to show how this architecture provides value to my organization. Can you show me how to build a data application which allows me to ingest, let's say, customer data from my Oracle database, which is on-prem, into the customer management data landing zone? I would also like to make this data set available within our environment for consumption by other data applications. And in addition to that, there's already a data science team waiting to get started on building the recommendation engine that I mentioned earlier. They want to train machine learning models and create new curated data sets for other teams to consume. So my question to you is, how would such a use case be implemented within the data landing zone that you just showed us?
So thanks, first of all, for sharing these next steps with me. So let's walk through how this use case can be realized inside your data landing zone. And according to our principles, we would first split the data integration and the data application, data product development into 2 architectural concepts, right? So the data integration would be executed by our metadata ingestion framework. So we would use our metadata ingestion framework to first land the data initially onto the raw and curated and enriched layer. Once that has been done, our data product team can then get started and then build, we can then use a use case team, right? That will be able to deploy their own resources within their own dedicated data application resource group. And here they can then start building this use case that you just mentioned, the recommendations engine. But let's look again into the portal and see how this can be done.
Sure.
So what we can see here, again, inside the runtimes resource group, we have the self-hosted integration runtimes, and those are shared with the data factory inside the shared integration resource group. So we will use that to actually load the data from your Oracle database into your instance, into your data lakes. So the data lakes are already connected here to the managed VNet via private endpoints. We have also linked services, and here's your Oracle database as linked service. Then we just have to execute and set up some pipelines that we can then use to land the data first initially onto the raw data lake, and then we can move it onto the enriched and curated layer. So in the portal, this looks like the following. So first we will land it here on the raw layer, and then ultimately on the enriched and curated layer. From here, the data application team can then pick up the data. And they can then, inside their application resource group, they can spin up their own resources. And as they are working on a machine learning use case, they can actually use our analytics data product template to quickly spin up an environment. And what they will get is also a machine learning workspace, and they can use that machine learning workspace to actually get started with the model training, with the model development. And With that template, they will also get computes automatically configured on the VNet, and everything is set up for them automatically.
Great. Thank you so much, Marvin. This was a lot of great learning. I really appreciate the demos. So I'm going to take off my customer hat now and just say that, we've only scratched the surface here and shared with you how you can quickly get started with deployments. We're hoping that you can use the wealth of resources that were referenced here today to help your customers on their data mesh journey. So thank you again to everyone who joined and listened in. I'll hand this over now to our panel of experts who are waiting to take your questions.
So thank you very much, Hamood, also Marvin, Piethein, Emerson, and also Espen as well. The team are here. We've managed to bring across some experts who have been working within the field of actually deploying this. The majority of the team have, but we thought we'd bring back a variety of guests. So I'd like to introduce back to you Namrata, who is based out in Asia. She has been working with a number of customers in Asia on deploying cloud scale analytics. Also have Emerson, who has been interfacing quite heavily into a number of chief data officers and CTOs in really understanding the space. Piethein, based in EMEA, again, a thought leader within that data mesh space, but equally working very closely with us on deployment into West Europe. So given we've got a number of kind of questions in here, what I would love to see is further questions in the Learn TV chat, or obviously on the YouTube chat as well. I'm trying to look at both sides as we go. So please place your questions there. I think to kind of start us off as we go at this moment in time, I'm going to just focus on Namrata. Namrata, you've been involved in a number of kind of engagements in APAC. What are you seeing with customers? Why are they looking at kind of cloud scale analytics, and how are you potentially taking them through some of the migration pieces on how do you move customers to it? I know you've been doing some great stuff there.
Yeah. So one of the customers that I've been working on, they have their Hortonworks platform on Azure IS, and which was coming to end of life, and they were exploring options to modernize the platform. Now, in that particular case, the directive from the CTO office was to pivot to a domain-driven design for applications, right? And from a bank strategy, that's a banking engagement, so from a strategy perspective, they wanted to adopt the microservices architecture. Now the challenge that the bank was facing was how to bring domain driven design and product thinking to data and analytics, right? And that's where we started discussing cloud scale analytics with the customer. So that was the starting point for this particular customer, because that directive came from the CTO. Otherwise, there are a couple of other customers as well where they're facing challenges in terms of having a very complex data landscape and everything is centralized. We've heard through this presentation about how we can decentralize the entire data landscape. So they have a lot of data sources, a lot of structured data, unstructured data, and they have a lot of business units, and each of them, they want their own isolated environment. So these are the triggering points. So that's the other customer requirements, so where we propose cloud scale analytics as well. So these are the two areas where I've come across. Really.
Great. Awesome. So then picking up on the question, I'm going to go to Emerson and Piethein, if I may. The key question I've got from Alexandra in the chat is, what are the key challenges you see in using a data mesh structure versus a more centralized approach? Emerson, do you have any viewpoint on that first? And then I'll go to Piethein.
Sure. So the question was, what are the challenges to go decentralized coming off from a centralized implementation?
Yeah. What are the key challenges you see in using? I've lost the question now. In using data mesh versus a more centralized approach.
Right. So in terms of challenges, what I see is for a lot of the organizations who are not structured yet, for having a proper domain owners, for example, they don't have the structure that supports like the people that will support data mesh. And so how we're trying to solve that is, how do we actually be in a transition phase from a centralized to a decentralized? So we have clients right now who don't have the organizational structure yet, but then we're starting building the domains. And the reason for this is, say, for example, the centralized team, the CDO office, or the shared services team, they are the ones who are building these projects. So what they're doing right now in terms of transitioning is they enable the ingestion of the data into the raw zones, right? For example, or the bronze zones, the conform layer. They are still able to build the projects for the different domains, but what they're doing is now they're landing all this data in the proper domain, in the proper tenant, and what have you, right? So what happens now is these different lines of businesses can enable and use our partners to kind of work with them in building the projects, right? So rather than thinking about having partners on a bigger shared services implementation, it's much more of like a small scale. The partner can help with them in an IoT implementation, and they have their own environments in that domain. So there is a challenge, but there are ways to actually get there. And we get it that not all organizations are structured that way, but you can enable data mesh by doing this.
Awesome, great stuff. And Piethein, from your side, the thing, what are the key challenges you see using a data mesh structure versus a more centralized approach?
Data domain ownership. So teams really need to be and feel accountable for their data. Also creating a proper data product, I feel, is quite difficult. So in the previous or in the centralized model, we had lots of data engineers closely working together. They designed the data warehousing environment or data lake environment quite well, but now suddenly you go distributed. So you need to give your teams proper guidance. Also, you need to set standards on interoperability to avoid data distribution really becomes a mess, because if each team decides for its own standard, then integration, distribution of data becomes quite difficult. So it's a tough challenge, I see, and you need to guide it, I think, also quite properly. And therefore, you should also slowly start. So do not.
Awesome, great, good stuff. And Namrata, I'm going to come back to you, because that change that we've got going through with various different customers in APAC is a great question. In moving towards data mesh, how does it look like resources within the organization? So have you got any insight to how customers are changing any of that on the resource, or I can go elsewhere, as it were?
In terms of the resources that are working on it, that is
Yes,
centralized. Okay, so this is exactly where the expertise, so that is required in each of the domains, and that's a little bit of a challenge in convincing the different stakeholders, because all this while there was a centralized team that had all the expertise in terms of technical knowledge, but then now each of the domains need to have the technical knowledge as well. So that is a bit of consideration to have in terms of the resources.
Awesome, excellent. And Piethein, from the stuff that you've got going on in Western Europe, how are you seeing organizations change? Are they having to change?
It's a good question. It's difficult. I see it's mostly a cultural change rather than a technology change. So you need to think quite well along of your data strategy and how to move forward. It's a longer term transition, not something that happens overnight. It's
Awesome.
the people, the skills, like I think, Mike, you said that as well in the beginning. So, or in the keynote we heard, well, people skilling is really important.
Yeah, good. I think it's a great one. Thanks for that, Piethein. Great one for Emerson that's just come in. And I say this because we talk about it offline quite often. How do you fix and avoid data silos issues that a traditional data warehouse tried to fix? Different teams doing their own data engineering might have different numbers, and how do you avoid the business losing confidence in data? And I think we were talking about it the other day about kind of management pieces, but I'll let you lead that conversation on from there.
Absolutely. So data silos, they become silos because you cannot find them. It's kind of like confined to different places. That's why foundational is that data governance, being able to build that catalog so that you can see data across the organizations. So a lot of that is having all that data in that one layer, that governance, so that data is discoverable. Data, you can get more context about data, metadata, business glossary, business terms, all of that. It is foundational. The second piece to that is to avoid the silos is having that unified data storage, if you will, right? Making sure that the technology is there. We got the data lake house. That's great. That reduces a lot of that silos because now data can be accessed from the lake. But how do you kind of enable now, for example, using some of the data coming from SQL databases? You can find them in the catalog, but how can I get access to it, right? Which is, using, for example, the Piethein example where you can request access to that data. By doing this request or these services, you're kind of like eliminating the roadblocks to get access to the data that you didn't have, you didn't know before and you didn't have access. So we go beyond that so that you are actually democratizing that data. Hopefully that provides some context.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that input. I'm just going through the questions there. They are coming in fast and furious. I'm trying to pick it. So, open book on this one. Whoever wants to answer this. My client's CDOs has several questions regarding how to implement and automate in Azure data quality controls, rules in their ownership, stewardess on the control plane. Is it possible in Purview? And I know Pete. So open to Emerson, Piethein, Namrata, whoever wants to jump in, because I know you've all had expertise in this area.
Piethein, you want to go first?
Yeah, I know changes will come, so I don't know how much I can say on this, but Purview will definitely play a role in that part. In that respect, I also see companies, they develop their own metadata framework, and data quality often then is part of that framework. So when data is moved across different domains, data quality controls kick in, data is scanned for data quality, and the results are feed it back to, for example, central metadata store, or you could even think of Purview where you store the actual data quality results within. Maybe Emerson, something?
Yeah, and I think that the challenge that we have here is we are in a public event. But if you're an organization, please reach out to us. We have under NDA, we can share the roadmaps that we have when it comes to Purview. But I would like to give the comfort that, yes, a lot of these things that we're talking about, this is not the stop for it. There's a lot of innovations that we're putting in, not just on the Azure Synapse, the data lake, the Purview altogether, Power BI as well. So please reach out to us. We'll be able to kind of share more. But the answer is yes, it's going to get easier, a lot easier actually in the future.
Awesome stuff. Thank you both of you. Sometimes customers are not sure what could be the different data products for their domains. Is there a recommendation way to define a data product for an industry, some shared services and domains? So Namrata, I'm going to just maybe look to you. When you were working with the APAC customers, how did you approach that kind of looking at the data applications, data products?
It was use case by use case. So that's how we picked up each of the use cases. A lot of data sets were involved there, and then that was arrived at as a data product, one particular use case. So that's one of the approaches where anything that is reusable, used by multiple other domains, could be a data product. Say like a financial statement, for example. That's one of the examples I can think of. But then, yes, you'd have to follow an approach there to define the data products. It could be use case by use case as well.
And to Piethein, one of the things that we've had a chat about multiple times is, look, it looks like a real big bang approach that I have to go and do this, but increasingly coming out of the of the piece. And interesting, I've just seen that Jonathan's posted that it looks very daunting to go and deploy a data management landing zone and a data landing zone, but we've put together kind of a starting checklist, haven't we, about where to start. And I wondered whether you could just expand on that, just to give reassurance that you don't have to go for a big bang to start off with. We can start small.
Absolutely. So I think on the Microsoft Docs page now you will find best practices and guidance also for this. But typical approach would be to start small with one single data management landing zone, one data landing zone, then, and maybe with one first or two domains, and look at the data product creation first, create that end-to-end pipeline or use case, and see how that works in practice, and then what kind of principles you need to add and how to continue further. That would be my best practice.
Excellent. And Emerson, when you're talking to the CDOs and to chief data officers, so I'm using acronyms, terrible. So it's chief data officers and the chief information officers and the chief CTOs. You know, what are their kind of passions when they see where we're going compared to their concerns? So,
Right. So the concerns that they have is around how do we create data agility, because everyone wants to build insights, but the data is not ready, it's not clean. And that's why we responded by building this automated data operations, right? That's one of the concerns that they would like to implement. The second one is how to kind of have this unified ecosystem, because in everyone's mind right now, there is the data warehousing solution, there's machine learning, there's IoT. But as an organization, you shouldn't be really thinking about your solutions as siloed solutions, that you have an IoT for real-time streaming. It should be all unified, if you will. So those are the things that we are trying to kind of create here as part of the North Star that we're providing, right? Create the domain, so we're focusing on the data consumption, focusing on the business needs, focus on the data products. The data products would, in a lot of domains, becomes very, very obvious. And we can provide more examples on that. Reach out to us further. We have some kind of examples that we're going to be releasing on retail, potentially with other industries, but happy to kind of think about how to share how we think about building the data products from the different organizations. And yeah, that's what I have for now.
Cool. Excellent. Thanks, Emerson. Thank you both. So final question, and then we'll conclude. So it's come up repeatedly actually in a number of the pieces. One is along the lines of it's about the dev test kind of product question. So how do you handle dev test prod in a data mesh environment? Who wishes to take that one?
I don't see personally any difference, like today's environment. So I would expect so. Also in your current situation, there would be a dev test and also production scenario and these different phases. So how would it look different in data mesh? Maybe it's more decentral, and I think the flexibility there and the difference you would see is different teams have different heartbeats, so they could follow their own rhythm in how they develop things and move things into production and how they deploy data products, for instance. So to me, that's maybe the only difference I see. But maybe to you, Emerson, do you see?
It's the same. Like if you think about it, we are following the same practices, implementations, what have you. We are federating, right? That's the difference that we're taking. We don't have a monolithic implementation. We are federating to the multiple domains. We are adding governance on top of that, or we should have a governance on top of that. So all of that foundational implementation, maybe DevOps, governance, what have you, it's still the same implementation as if you have a monolithic implementation, as an example.
Yeah, great. So before we close, I just want to give the three of you just 30 seconds, just in case we've missed anything out in the world that we should make a point of. So, Namrata, is there anything that you would close with, or some thoughts that you would give as highlights to our audience today?
I think the domain identification is one, and start small. That's one, which I have always seen with the customers. They're very concerned about starting with multiple subscription per domain. So start small with a single subscription, plan out with one domain at a time, and then move forward as it goes.
Great. Emerson.
Yeah, I think for me, focus on the business problems. Right? If it's very specific to a line of business, what I find is like marketing, for example, they're the prominent ones that can start with this domain, start enabling them. Don't overthink data mesh because it is a concept where you are federating. Tackle it like to Namrata's point, is start with one domain, two domains that make sense. I have clients, for example, who has a big project and it makes sense to have their own domains. Maybe that's a good start. Right? Focus on that domain and start kind of growing from there. It's not an overnight kind of evolution from monolithic to a federated implementation. But I see a lot of success and agility for our clients who are actually doing that. That's all I can say for now.
Super. Piethein, in 20 seconds.
20 seconds. Look at the Azure docs. There's so much wisdom. We launched a whole bunch of new documents on data domains, master data management, data marketplace, data products, self-serve data platforms, these different topologies like Espen and I discussed. There's so much more you can find. So look at the Azure docs.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever you are in the world. We value very much you putting the time in to come and watch the sessions today. And more so, participate in questioning. It helps us grow the product. Until next time, thank you very much.